This episode of Pencil vs. Pixel is brought to you by Treehouse. Start your free trial by going to pencilversuspixel.com/treehouse. Hey everyone, welcome to Pencil vs. Pixel. My name is Caesar, and I have the pleasure of being joined today by Samantha Warren. Hi, Samantha.
Hey, how's it going?
It's going great. Thank you for being on the show.
Thank you for having me.
Samantha Toy Warren is a designer at Twitter. She is also a speaker and the creator of Style Tiles, a online open source solution that helps web designers present deliverables at the beginning stages of a project. So Samantha, before we continue, I'm going to ask you, pencil or pixel?
Both. It's got to be both. I rarely do something just for digital purposes. I mean, a lot of times the output is digital, but I'm always brainstorming, I'm always writing, I'm always taking notes, I'm always doodling, and I'm always planning. I'm a planner and a note taker. So a little bit of both. Yeah. When I went to school, I originally actually, I was a fine arts major, so I've done quite a lot of drawing in my time.
Oh. Now, I've given a little background about who you are and what you do, but we want to get to know you a little bit better. What's your story?
Well, I will start from the beginning, I guess. I my parents are both really creative people. My mom went to art school. She for fashion illustration. My dad's a super handy guy. Does all sorts of like woodworking and stuff. And so he actually had a printing company when I was
Wow.
in middle and high school. And so my weekends were spent helping out at his printing company, doing a lot of collating, a lot of envelope stuffing. Learned the hard way how to make sure there's no humidity in paper before feeding it into the printer. So that's kind of how I got involved with graphic design, because there's actually an art school across the street from where he had his print shop. So I would see a lot of the work the designers had, and
That is so cool.
yeah. So that's when I decided to choose art and graphic design as a major in college.
If design wasn't something that you would have done, I mean, what would be the next thing after that you would?
Ooh. That's a really tough question because I don't think a lot, I never really thought a lot about anything outside of the art world. Um, and I have later in life, actually, like more recently, I've been like, what would I have done if this wasn't an actual field I could have gone into, or if I would have taken a different path? And I actually think I may have been more of somebody who could have gone into nursing, or
Really?
maybe something where I'd help people in that regard. Like I really like talking to people. Maybe counseling or therapy or something along those lines. But I like talking to people, and I've talked about this a lot in my Style Tiles presentation. But to some degree, I see sometimes myself as a designer being a counselor, like trying to figure out what's going on inside this person's head so I can help them visualize it in a design. So perhaps maybe something along those lines.
Wow.
I know that sounds kind of like way out there, but I see
No,
the
no,
connection
no.
pretty strongly.
I never really thought about. But it's true though, because like in design, you are essentially helping solve a problem, and you're helping, clients or if you're working at a company, you're helping them solve a specific problem, and then you do have to sort of get in there and figure out what they're thinking, make sure that the rest of the team is on the same page, and then
Yeah.
execute, right?
Maybe even like a detective, perhaps. I've thought about that actually watching like SVU and CSI and that
Yeah.
sort of stuff. Like, wow, like they're really like having to get inside this person's head and think about what's going on. It's kind of like what I have to do sometimes with people to figure out what this website's supposed to be.
After your time in school, what happened after that? Did you land a design job already right after school, or did you sort of start looking for what exactly in design you wanted to pursue and do?
So That's a really interesting question because I had a bit of a bumpy start. When I graduated from uh, school, the market was just really bad. Like the idea of getting a design job was really like far fetched. And I had been so focused for so long, like I'm going to make a career out of this. I wanted to make sure that I actually became a designer because I'd heard all these horror stories of people going to school for design and then finding out, oh, it's really hard to get a job in that. So they do something else. And I just knew that that wasn't the path for me. So I pounded the pavement for about, I think, 4 or 5 months. I worked all through college at a print shop. So I kind of had that still going. It was a really great learning experience. And it's wonderful when you're in college to work at a print shop because then, I mean, back in the day, like everything I was doing was printed. So
Yeah.
I had all that printed while I was working. And so I landed a job at a museum exhibit design firm
Wow.
in Richmond, Virginia, and it was a really interesting fit. It was uh, large scale museum installations. Uh, they worked. There was a one museum I worked on that I remember was just crazy. Is the Museum of the Shenandoah Valley, and it was it was this
Sounds
man.
interesting.
It's interesting because it was this man who actually had very little to do with the Shenandoah Valley, but he left all of his money to a museum. Like he wanted a museum built with it. So there was all this stuff about the valley that he lived in, but then there were all of his personal belongings in the museum. So actually was a proprietor of miniatures, like doll houses, like miniature versions of movie sets. And so my job was to Photoshop all of these like little tiny pieces of furniture and like crop them out and cut them out. And I was really good at the Photoshop masking tool for like months. I just did
Nice.
that. So that actually didn't work out very well. I became pretty unhappy with doing that just because it wasn't really what I saw myself doing. And a lot of times you build these museums and they don't actually, or you design these museums and they don't get built for years. And so I wasn't feeling any sort of gratification.
Why is
I say,
that?
well, in the sense of I was working on, for example, all of these graphics that went with a specific room, but then there's the architect who's involved, the interior designer. There's all of these pieces that I really didn't necessarily have a full grasp of. I was kind of given these architectural drawings, and I actually worked in AutoCAD a lot. And so it's kind of like designing something without really ever getting to see the prototype of it. You just have to have faith that it's all coming together pretty well. And I actually didn't see the museum finalized for 3 or 4 years after I left the job. So
Was it pretty disappointing? Not. I mean, was it sort of like I mean like a stab? You know, like, oh, I've done all this work and now what?
so that was one of my projects. There was also we worked on a lot of signage. We worked on a lot of wayfinding around different like we did the downtown wayfinding in Richmond, Virginia. And so in general, there was just a lot of stuff that I was working really hard on that I never got to actually see. And so I think after it was about 6 months that I just sort of I kind of got burnt out on that, and I knew that there was something I needed different. So I actually started to I went to a temp agency, which a lot of my professors in college had advised against. I actually think it was the best thing I could have done because I was then placed at I think 4 or 5 different, completely different kinds of jobs. So I worked in house at Wachovia. They actually had an in-house design department. I worked in-house at Circuit City. I worked for a small, just logo and at the time website design firm, and so that was the last place I temped at where they actually hired me on, and I got my first taste of the web there. But at that point in time, I had sort of done a lot of different little things, and I was ready to kind of take a bite and get really more into web design. And I had this magical, strange call one day where a friend of mine who knew me through school uh, said, I'm working for the U.S. Army on the Army's website, and we've hired developers before, but they don't really know how to design. So we're thinking about hiring a designer and teaching you how to build websites. And so I kind of dropped everything at that point and went to do that.
Oh, man.
I was a contractor that worked directly with the Army. It was a really interesting, we had a great group of folks, really talented. Everybody who I worked with on that team, they all went on to do really amazing things afterwards. So it was kind of this sort of ragtag group of people who had this unique experience where the Army didn't necessarily understand what they were supposed to be doing with their website, because it's like really like we're talking like early 2004 at this point.
Wow.
And so they're like, we have this thing, we don't know, like, can you just manage it for us? And so this group of really talented folks got together and we sort of started making interactive experiences. So at the time, Flash was really big, so we made like an interactive Battle of Gettysburg.
No way.
Yes.
So cool.
And so I did that for about 3 years, and it was really a lot of fun, and everybody I worked with was super talented. I'm going to actually close this blind really fast. Hold on a second.
Oh, no worries. So would you say that after doing that website for the Army, I mean, was that sort of the point, that was the point of no return? That was, were you hooked on the web?
Yeah, I was hooked. It wasn't like I just all of a sudden started building websites. That experience was super humbling. I remember the first time I showed a design to the group, they just were like, that looks like a brochure. That's not a website. So it was a real learning experience. I was kind of that pain in the ass designer who was like, well, why can't we put the navigation in a circle? You know, anything you can think of that's just that pain in the ass, like, why can't you do that on the web? I asked that question, and this really patient, amazing group of talented people kind of moved me in the right direction. And then we started building the sites, which was great because first time I built the site, I literally made a Photoshop file. They sat down next to me, they coded like part of it, and then erased it and said, you do it now. And so that's how I learned. Yeah. Yeah, high five to Eric Lohman and Donnie Steele.
Oh my goodness. That is the coolest. I mean, that's the coolest way to learn though, because you saw them doing it in, real time, right?
Yeah.
You were watching them, and then they just wiped it out and said, here you go. Give it a whirl. It's all yours, right?
I remember the first time that happened, I was just like, woo. No okay. And then I thought to myself, wow, I would have made that Photoshop file a lot easier to code.
You were still working as a temp at this one web agency? So
at the Army, I stayed there. I was permanently there for about 3 years. We were technically embedded with the Army. We had our own really cool studio we sort of kept, but at that point, I knew I wanted to try some different things. So I moved on to Ogilvy in Washington, D.C., which was a really great experience as far as getting a taste of big brands. And I met some people that I would say are now, to some degree, my mentors, people I really learn a lot from and I still look up to and keep in touch with. But I sort of also learned that maybe advertising wasn't for me.
So back at that museum design studio, it sounded a lot like what I hear people say about ad agencies, like where you're just putting together all this stuff, these ads, you spent hours and days and months on projects and they never come to life.
Yeah, I think that's a big piece of it. But with advertising, that I found really interesting was we were really focused on selling a product versus where you look at museum exhibit design or the work I had been doing for the Army, and it was more about helping users, like helping people find what they're looking for, helping tell a story. And so for me, advertising and the sales part of it sort of didn't really resonate, especially like we get these like kind of crazy clients who were really just like not quite they weren't the right fit for social media strategy. And so then we'd have to make it fit. And while that was exciting to get to work with those really big clients, I was more interested in helping people to get somewhere or do something better or improve their lives in some way.
I love it.
Somebody downstairs from me is cooking something really delicious smelling right now.
It's almost dinner time, huh?
It is, but I'm actually juicing today.
You're what?
I'm juicing.
So you're not going to eat?
No, just juice.
Oh
Just today though, it's
man,
my last day doing it. It's
how is
actually
that?
amazing. I feel wonderful.
Really?
Yes, I feel so good. It's
You
the
get like
best
everything
thing.
that you need though, like all your vitamins and protein and all that stuff?
Yeah, so they actually told me I can eat an avocado.
Huh.
So I ate one avocado and I feel fantastic.
Like a whole avocado?
I ate a half a avocado for lunch and then a half for a snack later.
Oh
Yeah.
my goodness, that's cool.
Yeah.
And you feel good?
I feel wonderful.
You're
I
not like
actually
dizzy or anything or
no, actually after this I'll probably go for a run or take a walk,
no
go
way.
outside. Yeah.
See, I feel like I'll collapse
Oh.
if I do that.
No, I think I've gotten over that hump.
Okay, that's probably like the first few days or maybe the first 1, 2 days, right?
Yeah.
I might try it. I mean, it's a good way to like get all the toxins out and all that stuff.
Yeah, but it's good like to reset because now I don't crave like desserts or anything.
Oh, nice.
Yeah.
Let's talk about style tiles.
Okay.
Yeah, I'm a huge fan of style tiles. It's helped me tremendously with my projects, and I'm sure it's helped a lot of designers. I'll ask myself, how can I contribute back to how can I contribute to the creative community?
Mm-hmm.
And I always find myself referring back to projects like this, like style
Mm-hmm.
tiles. Was that sort of the idea you had behind it?
Yeah, it was an idea that kind of culminated after my experience working with a lot of engineers and developers. In the open source world of development, that's how things get done, right? Like advancements are made because people are transparent in their decision making, transparent in their process. They post all these things online, and therefore we get things better. Like things become better over a period of time on the web because of this. And so designers for a long time, like I've really disliked the secret, like, oh, this is our secret sauce at our agency. We're not going to share it because we don't want other agencies to steal it. But the reality of the situation is there's like a lot of stuff out there for us to do better. So why not share some of these things? And so I worked with a lot of engineers in the open source community at the time, and we were always talking about, what should we open source next? What should we do next? And it seemed very obvious to me that I should just try and give my process back. But it also was a little bit a part of the fact that when people talk about open sourcing design, they often see it as a very negative thing. Like, oh, you mean like crowdsourcing or like it just there seems to be like this design by committee mentality to the idea of open sourcing design when it doesn't have to be design itself is what the end product is. Like people aren't necessarily when you're open sourcing a development project, you're not necessarily just getting the code and using it exactly the way it is.
Right.
You're taking the process and the foundation and the framework and then you're adapting it to what you need. And so that's sort of why I wanted to put style tiles out there, because I thought to myself, this is something I can put out there and people can adapt to the way they need it. And then when I'm in their situation, I might be able to use what they've learned from this. And so that was the beginning of the thinking. I mean, there was also a little bit of just in general hope that maybe we'd start to get to move past this idea of, responsive design. It's so expensive. Like, hey, wait, if we find efficiencies here, it can be the same price structure. So there was a little bit of that as well for me, because I just kept on hearing from people saying, responsive design's so expensive, it's so difficult for agencies to do all of this stuff. And I was just thinking to myself, well, maybe we should rethink the way we price this and the way we deliver these pieces of work throughout the process.
Yeah, it's been very, very helpful. Have you had a lot of people reach out to you and say, "Hey, this has really helped my company or my projects"?
Yeah, the response has been overwhelming, and I think for me the response over the period of time has been really overwhelming. I think when I first published the first A List Apart article and I spoke at South by Southwest, I expected some level of feedback, but I think that's now like 2 or 3 years ago. I mean, this has been something that has really transformed over a period of time. And people are still coming up to me saying that they're using them. And it's really awesome. But what I want to hear is like people saying, hey, I use them. And hey, I posted my case study of how I used them here. And that's the type of stuff I would love to see happen next, because I personally keep like a Pinterest board of this sort of stuff, but I would love to see the community take the concept and push it to the next level.
Wow.
Yeah, because one of the biggest questions I get from people is, how did you convince your boss to let you do this? And so for me, I was in a really unique situation. I worked at an agency that really trusted me. It was to some degree my job to
Right.
innovate. So I was able to do this and move it forward. But other people, they have to convince people, their bosses and stuff. So the best way to convince your boss is to show them, hey, it worked for them. And so getting more case studies of when it did work for other people up online is, I think, the best way for us all to help each other in sort of making this more of a standard, so that my hope was always that people would come to me and say, hey, can we get style tiles instead of a full mock-up? And that eventually did become the case for me. But I want it to be the case for everybody.
Yeah, absolutely. Jason Fried said something similar where if you're hiding your, the way you do things, it's not really, it's not benefiting anyone. Would you say that because you created Style Tiles, it's opened doors to many more things in your career?
Yeah, I think in general, the level of feedback I've gotten from people is has been enormous. Just people contacting
Yeah.
me out of the blue. I've been asked to speak a lot of wonderful places. That's been fun. To some degree, it has helped me where to get where I am now, which is at Twitter. The process itself applies to so many problems that are applicable in house or with clients, and so to some degree, there's been a bit of a transition in that regard, and it has opened a lot of doors for me.
So let's talk about Twitter a little bit here.
Okay.
I was hesitating on that question, but you probably get that question a lot. How is it working at Twitter? How's the culture? How's what kind of things do you guys do that separates you from other companies?
Yeah, the culture at Twitter is very value centric. There's a lot of values that we have as an organization that resonate a lot with me. So, for example, there's quite a lot of value placed on the idea that we all have passion and personality. This is something that both us as people who work at Twitter, we apply to how we deal with each other and how we hire and that sort of thing. But also the fact that Twitter is a platform for people to share their passions and their personality. And so these values, to some degree, really create a culture that's a little different than anywhere I've ever worked before. Everybody is super passionate. Everybody's super motivated. There's a lot of really interesting people from all over the world that I work with, and they're just motivated like I've never seen people motivated before. So in that regard, it's really interesting and exciting. But it also presents new challenges for how you design in an environment like that.
Does
It's funny.
what was that?
Somebody once said, like, wow, like, if you ever really think about the idea that Twitter itself is a platform for being social, and then you kind of see how that then translates to the people who are there, who work there. It's just an incredibly social culture. Everybody's talking all the time, sharing ideas. There's a lot of kind of extracurricular things that we do. Improv is a big piece of the culture. Dick Costolo, our CEO, actually used to be a member of Second City, like with Tina Fey and Steve Carell. Yeah, so we have really great, yeah, super fun meetings. He's always cracking jokes. Yeah.
That is so cool. Would you say that are they cool with the idea of you working on other projects, other or open source projects while you're working at Twitter? Is that sort of the culture?
Well, I think in general, so much of what we do at Twitter does depend on open source software and the open source community. So I know that, especially in the engineering org, that's a huge part of the focus that a lot of the engineers have. How can we open source this? How can we make this a part of something that we can give back to the community? Because we use a lot, so therefore we want to give back a lot. And that, I think, translates over to the design area as well. There's a lot of people who do really interesting things in their spare time. We have some folks who are painters, folks who work on poster design outside of work. Actually, Colleen, she's a tango dancer. So, I mean, that's part of where the passion and personality come in, right? Like, there's people who have all these really great interests, and that's part of what brought them to Twitter. Therefore, Twitter as a platform, so that's why they also are there. So to some degree, it's just part of the culture.
It's so cool. I'm gonna change gears a little bit here. Tell us about a time when you experienced a big challenge, something that just didn't go right. What happened, and how did it all work out at the end?
That's a really interesting question, because in retrospect, a lot of challenges I have may have felt enormous at the time, considering the context of them. But then in the bigger picture, maybe that really has been that big a deal. But I mean, even today, I was just thinking about, we were trying to choose a typeface for a project, internally, and there was a lot of disagreement. This was at a previous agency I worked at, and there was a lot of input, and I was thinking to myself, wow, we can't even choose this typeface. But the reality of the situation is like, no one can really choose a typeface. Like, these are problems everyone has. So being flexible, and I think stepping back and kind of reminding myself, hey, it's just design, right? Like, the typeface it's just a typeface. It's really important that we get it right. Like, we should always be rigorous and get it right, but not to let these things completely just stop us in our tracks. So for me, it's being flexible and taking a step back and relaxing. I do tend to get a little wrapped up in work and just be like so focused. So yeah, I've been trying a lot to get in touch more with nature as well, and meditating.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
I hear about so many people in Silicon Valley and San Francisco, getting into meditating. It's like it seems to be a really big thing. Maybe because a lot of people voice it up north, but is it sort of do you see that as being part of the culture in San Francisco?
Well, I will preface this with, I just got started. I'm a newbie to it,
Nice.
but it's one of the kind of extracurricular activities that they offer at Twitter, and the same person who offered me, or who got me involved in juicing, also kind of introduced me to meditating. So I think there is a little bit of that here in the San Francisco area. It is a bit of part of the culture, but I wish it was a little bit more. I think like something like meditation, for example. I mean, there's pockets of people that you'll find who are really into this sort of, get in touch with nature, kind of the hippy dippy old school San Francisco vibe. But then there's this like really strong line between them and then like the new age sort of tech culture. And so I'd love to see a little bit more of that happening, because people just work so hard here in San Francisco. I mean, their lives or their startups or their companies. And so taking a step back and doing something like meditating, I think maybe something we all need a little bit more of.
Oh, absolutely. I completely agree. I haven't done it as much. I've tried it. And, the beginning stages could be very difficult. But
yeah,
because you start thinking about all kinds of things and you have to focus. But
the last guy who was leading our meditation session started the session with telling a story about monks. And I'm sorry if I messed this up, because I'm sure there's truth behind the story. But these monks, they meditate and they try and slow their breathing to the point that they stop breathing and then they die. And he's telling this story and he's like, but we're not going to take it that far today. And I'm kind of like looking around and I'm like, does anybody else like see what's going on here? Like, what's he talking about?
Wow.
Yeah. So I would say that I'm not quite at the self-reflection level where I can say that I'm that hardcore into meditation.
What were other people's reactions when that happened?
Calm, like very calm. And I'm like, I mean, maybe they were freaking out inside, but I was just like,
totally be freaking out.
It's like, why would we want to do that ever? No.
Oh my! Oh, that's just but overall, meditation I think is something really, really good to at least give it a try,
Yeah,
right?
totally.
So, Samantha, so you do a lot of speaking, or excuse
Yeah.
me, you do a lot of public speaking at
Yeah.
events, conferences. What is it that you like most about public speaking? What is it that you like most about presenting new ideas or your own personal ideas to other creatives out there?
I think it goes back to the whole open source idea. One of the things that when I was working with the engineers in the open source community was I always felt like I wasn't giving back enough. And they would turn to me and they're like, speaking is part of the open source community. That is giving back. So in a way, that's a big part of how designers are kind of open sourcing their process. They may not be seeing it the same as like open source software, but by sharing their knowledge in that way. So for me, it's about getting out there and kind of giving back all that has been given to me. Just I told that story earlier about the guys who were showing me how to code. You know, they took their time to sit there and show me how to code. Like I didn't learn this stuff from a book. A little bit I did, but like I didn't learn most of what I do on a daily basis. I did not learn in school. So it's part of taking all this stuff that people have been really patient in teaching me, and now maybe teaching other people those things, but also kind of adding my spin and solving problems that I have, and letting other people learn from those problems.
I wanted to ask you this earlier, but you started working at your dad's print shop. What's your feeling about print versus web?
This is kind of an interesting question for me because I'm probably one of the most opinionated in a very specific way people about this because I've been on both sides. I absolutely can't stand physical clutter. And so, to some degree, print for me really contributes to the physical clutter. So there's just so many things that I feel like should move to digital to reduce the clutter in our lives. However, that being said, I still very much value really beautiful things. The prints you have behind you right now are absolutely gorgeous. My husband is actually a designer as well. We have some
Nice.
pretty fantastic letterpress and screen printed posters. I still really value books and magazines, but just in general, like there's so many other things that I feel like should not necessarily be printed anymore. So I'm very opinionated on what should be printed versus not, and what, a one pager should not exist anymore. Everything should be online like that. Um, for me personally, like I love and value very sacred printed objects, but I don't actually like doing print design anymore, and that's just me personally because I sort of had so much background in that. And I appreciated all of the really interesting things I learned in that field. But the web to me is so exciting. And it's
Absolutely.
like I cannot you can get really great at like mastering letterpress or screen printing, but like as soon as you master something like responsive design, it changes the next day. There's something new to learn. You cannot be the grandmaster like web designer. It just doesn't happen. You're always learning. And so that sort of carrot is always there to chase. And that's what excites me about the web.
Oh, absolutely. It's always changing. Every single moment there's something new, right?
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
do you feel that we're just barely scratching the surface of web design?
Oh, absolutely. So I used to teach web design and typography for Boston University in Washington, D.C. And I had this really daunting task of putting together a syllabus for the history of web design. And I was kind of like, I started to like look at the history of web design, and it's like a dot. And then there's the history of graphic design, right? And I started to do some research, and I remember I tweeted a little bit about this, asking people, what they would recommend. And then I started trying to find stuff, and there's just like nothing, no record of a lot of this stuff that made a huge impact on people's lives and changed things. And it's just really interesting to me how quickly we forget. the stuff that change the way we do web design. So yeah, I think we're definitely just scratching the surface. I do kind of play this game in my own mind of what will be remembered in the history books, like who will be remembered, what will be remembered, because it is interesting to me to kind of see what makes an impact on myself versus what other people pick up. And yeah, we've got a ways to still go, and it's going to get kind of crazy, I think.
Wow. And I'm sure you have sort of a look into at least the immediate future of what's about to happen. Samantha, before we wrap it up, I wanted to ask you one of the big questions here. If there is one piece of advice that would help creatives take themselves to the next level, what would that be?
Take themselves to the next level. Well, first, define what you want that next level to be. So, as a creative, pushing the boundaries of the rules. I guess, yeah, like really thinking outside of the box. And I say that kind of like very generally, but for example, I used to, when I was hiring designers, I used to give them a style tile to make, right? And especially, or I've done workshops with style tiles. And it's really interesting because you hand them all the same PSD, and like 90% of them come back as the PSD just filled in and colored in. And the ones that everybody, like in the end, when you put them all up and everybody's really interested in, the ones that move you, the ones that tell a story, break all of the rules. And I never told anybody in these classes, I never told anybody in these interviews, you must stay within these bounding boxes. They just chose to. And so really thinking about taking the rules or the guidelines and thinking about how to transcend them and to tell a bigger story with what you're given. There's definitely, like, I'm a very practical person, but I can see where practical and pushing the boundaries collide. Like, that's sort of where I'm the most interested, is like trying to make those two things come together. But if you are, like, for a practical piece of advice, go out there and try and get outside of your comfort zone. Do something really different. For me, it was just trying to get my hands dirty in everything web related. So like I tried making a Flash website. So pick something, like whether it be your own site, a blog. Blogs on your own site are a great way to get started. And just like think, what would be a crazy thing for me to do here? What would be really pushing it to the next level for myself? Learn to code, or perhaps maybe for you it's learn a new medium. Maybe it's learning to paint. Maybe it's learning calligraphy. But sort of going out there and getting outside of your comfort zone as much as possible and not staying in the boxes.
That is absolutely great advice. Samantha, where can we find you online? I'm assuming Twitter.
Yeah, my Twitter handle is Samantha Toy. Toy is my middle name.
Yeah, we can talk about that. That is your middle name.
It is my middle name. And my website is samanthatoy.com.
Awesome. And everyone, you will be able to find this and everything we talked about today on pencilversuspixel.com. That's pencilvspixel.com/Samantha Warren. Samantha, thank you so much for being on the show today.
Thank you for having me.
And everyone, thank you for being here with us today. And we'll see you next week. Thanks.